He had already saved her life twice before she even learned his name. The first time, she handed him $20 like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. The second time, he took a bullet for her in the dark. Nathan Cole had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility. The quiet maintenance man nobody looked at twice. The single father who ate lunch alone, the man whose hands had once carried a rifle and now carried a wrench. He never asked for recognition. He never expected any. But on the worst morning Orion Nexus Corporation would ever survive, the man everyone overlooked became the only reason any of them made it out alive. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The rain came in sideways that Tuesday morning, the kind that made Seattle feel like it was trying to drown itself slowly, water hammering the glass towers of downtown and turning the streets into shallow rivers that soaked through the bottom of your shoes before you'd walked half a block. Nathan Cole noticed it the way he noticed most things, quietly, without making it mean anything more than it was. Weather, just weather. He pulled the collar of his work jacket tighter and stepped out of the bus at the corner of 5th and Pine, his old toolbox banging against his knee the way it always did, the handle wrapped in electrical tape where the original grip had cracked 3 years ago and he'd never gotten around to replacing it. He was 32 years old and looked every bit of it on mornings like this. Not old exactly, but worn in. The kind of worn that comes from doing hard things and not talking about them. His face was angular, clean-shaved most days, though this morning he'd missed a patch along his jaw, and his eyes were a quiet brown that didn't announce themselves. He wasn't a small man. He stood a shade over 6 feet, and there was a density to the way he moved that suggested something underneath the maintenance uniform. A coiled quality, like a spring that had been compressed for a long time. Most people never noticed it. That was the point. The Orion Nexus building rose 44 stories into the gray Seattle sky, a glass and steel monument to whatever a person could build if they were relentless enough and smart enough and willing to sacrifice the right things. Nathan had worked inside it for 2 years. He knew every mechanical room, every service corridor, every load-bearing wall and emergency shutoff valve. He knew which elevator needed its cable tension checked, and which bathroom on the 32nd floor had a slow drain that would back up badly if someone didn't snake it before the quarterly board meeting. He knew the building better than most people know their own apartments. He was invisible in it, the way furniture is invisible. Present, functional, taken for granted. He badged in through the service entrance on the east side, nodding to Dwayne at the security desk, who handed him a paper cup of coffee without being asked because that had become their routine. "You're early," Dwayne said. "Boiler room on 12 needs the pressure valve looked at before the morning shift starts using the showers," Nathan said. "You're always early." "Rain makes the bus faster." Nathan took a sip of the coffee. It was bad coffee, the kind that tasted like someone had run water through cardboard, but it was hot and free, and he appreciated it without needing to say so. He took the service elevator to the 12th floor, found the boiler room, and spent 40 minutes on his knees with a wrench and a pressure gauge doing the kind of work that kept the building running without anyone in the upper floors ever having to think about it. He liked that about the job. The results were real. The building either functioned or it didn't, and if it functioned, he'd done his job. There was no ambiguity in a pressure valve, no politics. He was back in the service corridor at 7:53 when he heard the commotion from the main lobby below. Isabella Vaughn had been awake since 4:30. This was not unusual. Sleep had always been something she negotiated with rather than surrendered to. She gave it a few hours, it gave her enough to function, and they reached an arrangement. She'd been running on 5 hours or less since her mid-20s, when she'd first started building Orion from a shared office space in Belltown with 2 engineers, a borrowed server rack, and a level of certainty about her own vision that most people would have called delusion if the company hadn't eventually proven them wrong. Now she was 30 years old, and the building bore the company name, and she had 240 employees and a product launch in 72 hours that represented the most significant moment in the company's 7-year history. The Nexus platform, a fully integrated enterprise operations system that Orion had spent 4 years developing, was going to redefine how mid-scale corporations manage their logistics, communications, and financial infrastructure. Every analyst who'd seen the demo was calling it a category maker. The investors were circling. The media coverage was already building. She had not slept more than 4 hours in 5 days. Isabella arrived at Orion at 7:45 in a black town car, wearing a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless but had taken 20 minutes. She was sharp-featured and composed, the kind of woman whose face defaulted to a neutrally assessing expression, eyes that moved quickly over rooms and cataloged what they found. She had a mind that operated at a pace that sometimes frightened even her. She could read a room in 10 seconds and identify every problem in it, every person who was performing versus actually producing, every weak point in an argument or a proposal. She also had a temper that she'd learned to manage but never fully tamed, and a tendency to reduce people to their function in her world, which was not cruelty exactly, but was something close to it, an efficiency of regard that left almost no room for irrelevant details. The maintenance worker on the 12th floor was an irrelevant detail. Her assistant Claire met her at the lobby entrance with a tablet and a brief. The Nakamura group pushed their meeting to 10. Legal wants 30 minutes before lunch on the licensing structure, and someone from building security left a note. About what? A maintenance technician. He apparently flagged some concerns about security protocols. The note says he's asked 3 times this week. Isabella took the tablet and scrolled without slowing her stride. What kind of concerns? He mentioned a delivery vehicle that's been stationary on the north side of the building for 4 days. Some anomalies with visitor credentials. He thinks. Isabella handed the tablet back without looking up from her phone. Get me Marcus before 9 and push the legal meeting to 1. The security note. Dwayne handles security concerns. That's why we have a security director. She stepped into the main elevator, pressed 42, and was reading a market analysis before the doors closed. The coffee happened at 8:17. Nathan had come down from the 12th floor and was crossing the lobby toward the maintenance station near the east wing, toolbox in hand, head down. He was moving at the pace he always moved. Deliberate, not hurrying, the gait of someone who understood that rushing through a building you were responsible for meant missing things. He was also, if he was being honest with himself, thinking about his daughter. Mia was 6. She had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness, and she had started first grade 2 weeks ago. And last night she'd told him at dinner that a boy named Connor had told her that her drawings looked dumb. Nathan had handled it the way he handled most things. He'd listened, he'd validated, without catastrophizing. And he'd spent 20 minutes after she went to sleep lying on his back on the kitchen floor, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much he wanted to fix everything for her, and how he couldn't, and how that was always going to be part of it. He was still somewhere in that thought when Isabella Vaughn came around the corner from the elevator bay, moving fast with a coffee cup in one hand and her phone in the other, and she didn't see him until her shoulder caught his and the coffee went sideways. It was a full cup, large, extra hot, which he knew immediately from the way it hit his chest, a spreading burn through his shirt, down his abdomen, soaking through to his skin. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word and stepped back, pulling the wet fabric away from his chest with one hand. Around them, the lobby was mid-morning populated. Front desk staff, a cluster of employees waiting for the elevator, 2 visitors in the reception area. Everyone saw it. Isabella looked at him. At his face for approximately half a second, then at her own ruined coffee, then back at him. Her expression did not soften. "You walked right into me," she said. Nathan looked at her. He didn't say anything. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. She shifted her phone to her other hand, opened her purse, and took out a folded bill. She held it out toward him. $20. "Buy yourself a better shirt." The lobby was very quiet. Nathan looked at the bill. He looked at her face. He saw, in the way he'd learned to see things in small spaces under pressure, exactly what was happening. The dismissal, the convenient assignment of fault, the reduction of him to an inconvenience. He also saw the 40 or so people watching to see what he would do, and he saw Claire standing 3 feet behind Isabella with an expression caught somewhere between embarrassment and the professional necessity of not showing it. He reached out and took the 20. He folded it once and put it in his chest pocket. "Have a good meeting," he said. He picked up his toolbox and walked toward the maintenance station. He didn't look back. His face didn't change. His pace didn't change. Behind him, Isabella was already talking to Claire, her voice resuming its brisk operational tempo, the moment already filed away as resolved. The employees at the elevator found somewhere else to look. The front desk staff found things to do with their keyboards. Nobody said anything to Nathan. Nobody asked if he was okay. He hadn't expected them to. In the maintenance station, a cramped, fluorescent-lit room behind a door marked staff only, he stripped off the wet shirt and dug the spare out of his locker, the one he kept because things like this happened when you worked in a building where people moved fast and treated their surroundings like infrastructure. He sat on the bench for a moment with the clean shirt in his hands. The $20 was still in the pocket of the wet one. He was not angry, or rather, he was, the way you're always a little bit angry when someone reduces you, but the anger was familiar and he knew what to do with it, which was nothing. Nothing external, anyway. He had a daughter to pick up at 3:15. He had work to do. He had a boiler on the 9th floor that had been running warm for a week. He had also, in the back of his mind, been turning over the same set of observations for 4 days, and the fact that nobody upstairs would hear them was beginning to feel less like bureaucratic friction and more like something he should be actively worried about. He had noticed the truck first on Friday. A white delivery vehicle, generic branding, parked in the loading zone off the north alley. That wasn't unusual by itself. Delivery vehicles came and went. But this one hadn't moved. He'd walked past it Friday morning, again Friday afternoon, again Monday. When he looked at it closely on Monday, the branding on the side, a company called Pacific Consolidated Freight, didn't match any of the regular vendors in the building's delivery logs, and the logs were something Nathan maintained as part of his responsibilities, so he knew them. He mentioned it to Dwayne on Monday morning. Dwayne noted it and said he'd check. Tuesday, he noticed the credentials issue. The building used a tiered visitor badging system. Day passes were a specific color and had a magnetic strip that logged entry and exit. Nathan had been in the lobby when 2 men came in, suits, mid-30s, corporate-looking, and signed in as consultants with a financial firm Orion worked with. He happened to be within range of the badge reader when one of them swiped in, and the reader made a sound he recognized. The soft double click that meant a credential read, but didn't log. It was a sound he'd heard exactly twice in 2 years, both times when a badge was defective or had been cloned. He'd mentioned that to Dwayne on Tuesday afternoon. He'd left a written note for building security on Wednesday. He'd asked Claire, Isabella's assistant, if there was a way to get a brief sit-down with someone in leadership. Claire had been kind about it and told him she'd pass it along. Thursday morning, he saw the drones. Small ones, consumer quadcopters modified for extended range, which he could tell by the frame extensions on the motors. They were doing slow passes at the northeast corner of the building, altitude around 200 feet, which put them just above the sight lines of the lobby cameras. He'd watched 2 of them through the window in the mechanical room on the 14th floor. They weren't delivery drones. Their flight pattern was systematic, a slow grid scan, the kind you did when you were mapping a building's exterior. He'd sent a formal written report to building security Thursday afternoon, marked urgent, requesting that it be escalated to the security director. He hadn't received a response. Friday morning, this morning, he'd seen 3 black SUVs. Different vehicles, different spots, but they appeared 3 times during his morning rounds. Once on the north side, once on the east, once parked against the curb on Pine, with a clear line of sight to the main entrance. The plates were different on each vehicle, but the tires were the same. Military spec all-season tires, the kind with a specific tread pattern he recognized from his years of watching for exactly this type of thing. You didn't put those tires on 3 unrelated civilian vehicles in the same city block by coincidence. He'd sat in the maintenance station after his morning rounds and thought about what it added up to. Fixed observation vehicle, compromised credentials allowing access to a secured building, aerial reconnaissance mapping the exterior. Multiple mobile assets positioned around the perimeter. He'd thought about this kind of thing in a professional context for 8 years. The conclusion it pointed to was not complicated. Somebody was planning something. It was organized. It was patient. And it was aimed at this building. He filed one more report at 11:15, this time directly to Marcus Sterling's office, because Sterling was the COO and in charge of operations, which included security. He marked it urgent. He included every observation with times and locations. He got a call back at 11:42 from Sterling's executive assistant, who told him that Mr. Sterling appreciated his diligence, but that the security team had reviewed his concerns and determined there was no credible threat. and that if he continued to raise the same issues through unofficial channels, it might be considered a disruption to pre-launch operations. Nathan set his phone down on the workbench. He looked at his toolbox. He sat with the feeling that had been building in his chest for 4 days. Not fear exactly, but a kind of specific dread he recognized from other times and other places when he'd been right about something terrible and nobody had listened. That feeling had a texture to it, a weight. He'd learned not to dismiss it. He called Dwayne. "One more time," Nathan said. "I need you to pull the logs on the North Service entrance and check for any credential anomalies over the last 10 days. Nathan, man, I know I'm asking you to do it again today." A pause. "You're that sure?" "I've been wrong before," Nathan said. "Not about this kind of thing." Some. His lunch break was at noon. He usually ate in the maintenance station, a sandwich he made in the morning, whatever was easy, eaten alone at the workbench while he read whatever was on his phone. He was not social in the way that required an audience. He had a small number of people he was genuinely comfortable with. Dwayne, a woman named Rosa who ran the cleaning crew on the upper floors and occasionally shared a coffee with him before her shift started, and his neighbor Mrs. Pacheco, who watched Mia on the days his schedule ran late. He thought about Mia while he ate. He did that most lunches. It wasn't worry exactly. She was fine, she was at school, she was surrounded by teachers and structure, but there was a frequency in the back of his brain that was always tuned to her, the way you can be in a loud room and still hear your name. He'd been her only parent for 4 years since the divorce, since the custody arrangement that gave her mother 2 weekends a month and gave him everything else. He hadn't fought for that arrangement. He'd wanted it. He'd left the Navy because he understood that someone had to be there every single day, and that person was going to be him. That was the decision, and he didn't revisit it. He made her lunches, and he helped with homework, and he sat through school plays and soccer practices and the endless procedural negotiations of raising a 6-year-old, and he would not trade any of it for anything the world had previously offered him. Though the world had offered him considerable things, that was the part nobody in this building knew about. He'd been a SEAL for 8 years, Team 3 out of Coronado. He'd run operations in places he still wasn't cleared to name in casual conversation, done things that were recorded in classified documents he'd never see again. He'd been good at it. Exceptional, his evaluation said, with a facility for tactical thinking under stress that his team leader called preternatural. He'd been fast-tracked for advancement, been offered positions that would have made him a significant figure in the special operations community. He'd turned them all down and left when Mia was 2. The marriage was already fracturing. Too many deployments, too many months where he was a voice on a phone and a face on a screen. And he'd seen the binary clearly. Stay in, lose the family, leave, lose the career. He'd chosen the one that felt irreversible. You could rebuild a career. You couldn't rebuild a childhood you'd missed. He didn't talk about this at work. It wasn't something he hid exactly, but he had no interest in performing his history for anyone. It was his, and it had made him what he was, and what he was did fine work maintaining the mechanical systems of a 44-story building. He finished his sandwich, folded the bag, and sat for a moment in the particular quiet of the maintenance station, listening to the building around him. The distant hum of HVAC units, the periodic groan of elevators, the water in the pipes. He knew this building sounds the way you know the sounds of your own home. When something changed, he felt it before he could articulate it. Nothing was wrong right now, but something would be. He was certain of it. The afternoon was routine until 3:15, when it wasn't. At 3:15, Isabella Vaughn's voice came over the building intercom, a function reserved for emergencies and all-hands announcements, asking all employees to proceed to the main atrium on the 2nd floor for an unscheduled company-wide briefing. Her voice was clipped and controlled in the way that meant she was managing something actively. Nathan set down the pipe fitting he was working on and listened to the announcement repeat. He went to the service window in the mechanical room on the 3rd floor, which had a line of sight down to the east side of the street. The 3 black SUVs that had been positioned that morning were gone. That made him move faster. He took the service stairs to the 2nd floor, not to enter the atrium. He wasn't part of whatever meeting this was, but to get to the security monitoring room adjacent to it, where Dwayne sat surrounded by camera feeds. He knocked and let himself in. "What's the announcement about?" Nathan asked. Dwayne looked up. His face had something in it that wasn't quite alarm but was getting close. Something happened with the Nakamura deal. Apparently there was a leak. Proprietary specs from the launch platform got to a competitor this morning. Sterling called an emergency briefing. Nathan looked at the camera feeds. Everything on the screens looked normal. Lobby, garage, south entrance, north. Pull up the north alley, Nathan said. Dwayne pulled it up. The white delivery truck was still there. And in the last 20 minutes, 2 men had moved from it to positions flanking the north service door, dressed in what looked like utility company uniforms. They were standing still in a way that utility workers didn't stand. Call 911, Nathan said. His voice was completely even. Right now, tell them you have indicators of an imminent forced entry by armed individuals. Give them the address and say you need tactical response. Dwayne stared at the screen. Nathan, look at how they're standing. Look at their hands. Call right now. Dwayne picked up the phone. Nathan picked up his toolbox. He moved out of the security room, back to the service stairs, and went up 2 floors to the mechanical room that sat directly above the north service entrance. From there, he had access to 3 things: the ventilation override panel, the emergency lockdown controls for the north wing's security doors, and a crawl space that connected to the maintenance shafts running parallel to every major corridor on the building's north side. He set the toolbox on the floor, flipped it open, and looked at its contents for a moment with the focused calm of someone who had done difficult things in difficult places and understood that the time for uncertainty was before, not during. His phone buzzed. A text from Dwayne. Police say 12 to 18 minutes. Building security is responding to the briefing announcement right now. Can't reach them. Nathan typed back, lock all north wing security doors. Do not open them for anyone without badge verification. Get yourself to the safe room. He was already moving. The briefing in the atrium had the specific energy of controlled chaos. 240 people packed into a space designed for formal presentations. The air thick with the kind of collective anxiety that builds when everyone can feel that something serious is happening and no one is saying exactly what. Isabella stood at the front, at the podium, and she was saying what she knew. A security breach had occurred, proprietary information had been exfiltrated. The company's legal team and cybersecurity consultants were already working the problem. She was good at this. Crisis communication, the controlled revelation of bad news in a way that projected command and held the room. She'd done it before, not at this scale, but the skill was there. She watched faces in the crowd and tracked their responses and answered the questions that needed answering and deferred the ones that would cause panic. Marcus Sterling stood to her left, a half step back, his expression composed in the way of someone who is very carefully not showing what they're actually feeling. He was 53, silver-haired, impeccably put together. He'd been with Orion for 4 years and had been, by most measures, an effective COO. He was precise and organized and slightly cold in the way that effective operations people sometimes were. Isabella had occasionally found him difficult to read, but she'd attributed that to his general affect. She was in the middle of explaining the timeline of the breach when the first sound reached the atrium. It was a low concussive thud, not quite an explosion, more like something very heavy hitting something structural, from the direction of the main entrance. The room went quiet for 1 second. Then the second sound came, and this one was unmistakable. The crash of reinforced glass and the tearing scream of vehicle frames punching through the lobby's front gates, followed immediately by the flat, hard reports of weapons fire. The atrium erupted. Isabella grabbed the podium. She had 2 security guards in the room, Fernandez and Walsh, and she saw them both moving toward the atrium entrance already, hands at holsters. She scanned the room for exits, for the best point of flow for 240 panicked people, The atrium doors burst open. The 2 men who came through them were wearing tactical gear, helmets, vests, the kind of professional loadout that belonged to a military contractor, not a robbery crew. They moved with the precise economy of people who had done this before, and they weren't sweeping the room randomly. Their eyes went immediately to the podium. Fernandez went down before he cleared his holster. Walsh was tackled before he could raise his weapon. The room dissolved into screaming, bodies surging toward the emergency exits, a wave of pure panicked momentum that knocked over chairs and scattered everything in its path. Isabella did not move. She stood at the podium with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes on the 2 men moving toward her, and for one fractional second she felt something she almost never felt, which was complete helplessness. Then a voice came from behind her left shoulder. "Get down!" She turned. Nathan Cole was standing in the doorway to the service corridor behind the atrium stage. The door that was supposed to be locked, that required a maintenance key, that most people in the building didn't know was there. He was in his work uniform, toolbox in hand, and his face was the same quiet face she'd seen that morning when she'd handed him $20 and told him to buy a better shirt. Except it wasn't the same, quite. Something had shifted in it. The quietness was still there, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the absence of something, but the presence of something contained. "I said get down," he said again, and his voice had dropped into a register she'd never heard from a maintenance worker. She got down. Everything that happened in the next 40 seconds, she would spend weeks trying to reconstruct accurately. Nathan moved left across the stage with a speed that her brain registered as wrong for someone his size, scooped a metal folding chair off the floor, and launched it at the nearer attacker in a single fluid motion that disrupted the man's aim just enough. He closed the distance before the man could reacquire and did something fast and brutal that put the attacker on the floor with his arm at an angle arms don't naturally achieve. The second man was already raising his weapon. Nathan had her arm and they were moving, not running, something faster and more controlled than running, through the service door and into the corridor behind the stage, the door swinging shut behind them, the sound of a gunshot flattening against it. The corridor was narrow and lit by fluorescent emergency strips. Nathan was already moving through it with the certainty of someone who knew exactly where he was going, one hand still on her arm, not dragging her, but maintaining contact. "There's a staircase 40 feet ahead," he said. "We're going down. Do not stop moving." "Who are they?" Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Later." He glanced back once. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Good. Move." They moved. In the mechanical basement, 3 floors below street level, a labyrinth of pipes and conduits and junction boxes that hummed with the industrial heartbeat of the building. Nathan stopped them at a juncture point and set the toolbox down and looked at her. She was breathing hard. He wasn't. "How many exits do you know from the main building?" he asked. "I know the lobby exits, the parking garage." Compromised. He was already opening the toolbox. "The front entry is gone. The north service doors are on lockdown. The garage would be their secondary approach." He looked up at her. "Is there anyone in this building you trust completely? Not professionally, not by title. Actually, trust." She thought about Claire. She thought about the atrium. She didn't know where Claire was. She didn't know where any of them were. "My assistant might still be... I mean for information. Who has access to Orion's financial architecture? The corporate structure? Shell companies? Subsidiary relationships?" She stared at him. "Why?" "Because somebody sent those men specifically for you. That doesn't happen without an internal source." He held her gaze. "I've been filing reports about this threat for 4 days. Every one of them got buried." The basement hummed around them. Somewhere above she could hear, faintly, sounds that she didn't want to interpret. Running, shouting, possibly more gunfire. "Who buried them?" she asked. Nathan looked at her steadily. "That's what we need to find out," he said. She looked at the man in front of her, the maintenance worker, the man she'd handed $20 to as though he were a vending machine, the man whose name she'd never once asked. He was crouching over his toolbox with the calm efficiency of someone sorting through options, and she realized she was looking at something she hadn't previously known how to see. "What's your name?" she asked. He glanced up, faintly surprised by the timing of the question. "Nathan." "Nathan." She said it like she was filing it properly for the first time. "What are we doing?" He closed the toolbox, stood, and looked at the corridor ahead. "We're surviving," he said. "Come on." 3 floors above them, in the chaos of the evacuating building, Marcus Sterling slipped his phone from his jacket pocket and typed a single text to a number with no name attached. "She's not in the atrium. Find her." He put the phone away and adjusted his tie and joined the stream of evacuating employees moving toward the emergency exits. His expression composed, his pace unhurried, his face the careful face of a man managing a crisis with professional calm. Nobody looked at him twice. That was the thing about power, he had always believed. When you had enough of it, you became invisible in a different way. Not because nobody saw you, but because nobody imagined what you were actually doing. He had always found that reassuring. Today, he found it less so. Because somewhere in the basement, the maintenance worker who had been filing those reports was down there with Isabella. And Marcus Sterling had made the mistake, 4 days ago, of dismissing a man he should have taken the trouble to understand. Nathan and Isabella moved deeper into the basement, and the building groaned above them like something alive. And the fluorescent lights flickered once and held, and the 44-story tower that bore her name and her company was now their only shelter. Its pipes and ducts and narrow service corridors, the only thing standing between them and the men who had come to end this version of both their lives. He knew this building. He'd always known it. Now he was going to use it. The basement had its own weather system. That was the only way to describe it. The constant cycling of warm air from the boiler systems mixing with the cool seep from the concrete walls, creating pockets of temperature that shifted every 20 feet. Nathan knew where each one was. He'd worked down here enough mornings to have mapped the whole place in his body, the way you eventually map any space you inhabit repeatedly. Left at the main junction, right past the water treatment manifold, straight through the narrow corridor where the ceiling dropped. And you had to tuck your head, then down the half-flight to the secondary mechanical room. Isabella followed him and said nothing, which he appreciated. Some people in high-stress situations filled silence with talk, because the silence felt like evidence of how bad things were. She wasn't doing that. She was breathing, she was watching where she put her feet, and she was thinking. He could see it in the set of her face, the way her eyes moved. Whatever else she was not someone who fell apart. He stopped them at the secondary mechanical room, a 12 by 18 space packed with junction boxes, pipe manifolds, and the building's secondary HVAC control panel. There was a workbench along one wall. His workbench, in a practical sense, though it belonged to the building. He set the toolbox on it and stood still for a moment and listened. Above them, through the concrete and steel, the sounds of the building were wrong. He could feel it more than hear it, a change in the ambient vibration, the way a house feels different when something structural has shifted. Somewhere up there, men with weapons were moving through a building they'd done significant reconnaissance on, and they were looking for the woman standing 3 feet behind him. "How many of them do you think there are?" Isabella asked. "What I saw in the atrium was 2. The entry team that hit the front would be at minimum 4, probably 6. They'd want a separate extraction team outside, another 2 or 3. Call it 10 to 14 total, with a command element somewhere." He turned and looked at her. They were organized and they came prepared. This wasn't improvised. "And you knew it was coming." "I knew something was coming. I didn't know when or exactly how." He pulled his phone out. "I need to check on my daughter." It was such a plain domestic thing to say in that moment that it visibly surprised her. He saw it, the brief recalibration on her face, the way she adjusted to this information about him. He wasn't self-conscious about it. He dialed Mrs. Pacheco's number, waited through 4 rings, and felt something loosen in his chest when she picked up. "Nathan?" "Yeah. You've got Mia today, right? After school?" "She's already here. She got off the bus 20 minutes ago. What is that?" He heard something in the background, a news channel, the particular urgent tone of breaking coverage. "Nathan, are you at work?" "The news is saying, I'm fine. Keep her home. Keep the TV off. Don't tell her anything's happening. I'll call when I can." "Nathan, she okay right now?" A pause. "She's in the kitchen eating a snack." "Good. Keep her there." He ended the call and put his phone away. Isabella was watching him. "Your daughter," she said. 6 years old. She's with a neighbor." He turned back to the HVAC panel. "She's fine." "How old was she when you left the Navy?" He looked at her sideways. 2. Isabella took that in without commenting on it, which was the right thing to do. He hadn't expected the right thing, and it registered. "Okay," she said instead. "You said someone internal buried your reports. Walk me through your thinking." That was also the right thing, kept on getting to what mattered, not spinning on the emotional weight of the situation. He could work with this version of her, whatever she'd been at 8 in the morning. He turned and leaned against the workbench and told her. All of it. The truck, the credentials, the drones, the SUVs, The sequence of ignored reports and the phone call from Sterling's assistant telling him to stop. He laid it out chronologically and without editorializing, the way he'd learned to debrief, and she listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "Marcus told me your concerns had been reviewed and dismissed," she said. "I know. He handles security oversight." "I know." The silence between those two facts was loud enough without either of them pointing at it. He watched her get there, watched the architecture of it assemble in her expression, the way the pieces connected, and she didn't want them to, but they did. "That's a significant accusation," she said. Her voice was careful, controlled. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything yet. I'm telling you what the facts suggest." He met her eyes. "But someone told those men to come here today. Someone told them when the entire company would be in one room. Someone told them where to look for you." She pressed her fingers against the edge of the workbench like she needed something solid. "Marcus has been with the company 4 years. I know. He has equity. He has... People do things for reasons that don't make sense from the outside," Nathan said. "I don't know his reasons. What I know is the pattern." He paused. "Does he have access to your corporate financial architecture? Subsidiaries, shell companies, outside accounts?" Something moved across her face. "He's COO. He has operational access to everything. Then whoever controls this operation has everything they need to take Orion apart from the inside once you're gone." She didn't respond to that. She didn't need to. The logic of it was sitting in the room between them with its full weight. A sound from the corridor, distant, but moving closer. Footsteps, multiple sets, not the purposeful single file of security personnel, but the spread formation of a search team. Nathan turned off the workbench light and took 2 steps to the door and listened through the gap he left it. 3 people. Maybe 4. One of them was issuing low instructions in a murmur that he couldn't fully resolve from this distance, but the cadence was command and confirm, someone running a search grid. They were on the main basement level, not the sub-level. For now. He turned back to Isabella and held up 4 fingers, pointed at the ceiling. She nodded. He had a decision to make. There were 3 options from this room. Back the way they'd come, which would take them toward the search team. East through the maintenance corridor to the secondary boiler room, which bought them 40 minutes at most before the search expanded to reach it. Or up through the ventilation access shaft that ran along the building's core, which was tight, hot, and uncomfortable, but connected to every mechanical room between the basement and the 22nd floor. He looked at Isabella, her blazer, her heels, the way she was holding herself. He looked at the ventilation access panel on the north wall. "Can you get into a 3-foot-wide shaft?" he asked. She looked at the panel, back at him. "Do I have another option?" "A worse one." "Then yes." He opened the toolbox and took out a flathead screwdriver and removed the panel in 45 seconds. Warm air exhaled out of the shaft, carrying the smell of metal and dust and the faint mineral sharpness of concrete. Inside it was dark and about 3 feet in diameter, running upward at a shallow angle before leveling to horizontal. Isabella looked at it with an expression that said this was not what she had expected her Tuesday to become. Then she took off her heels, held them in one hand, and got on her knees. "You'll need both hands," Nathan said quietly. She set the heels down without looking at them again, just left them there on the basement floor. He filed that away as information about her. He went in first, pulling the toolbox behind him on a short, improvised line he rigged from a section of cable he kept in the box. He wasn't leaving his tools, they were the only advantage he had in this building, and Isabella followed, and he pulled the panel back into place behind them by feel in the dark. The shaft was exactly as unpleasant as it always was. The metal surface was warm, and the clearance was tight enough that moving required a specific rhythm. Elbows, knees, keep your head down, don't rush. Nathan moved through it the way he moved through everything, economically, without wasting energy on the discomfort. Behind him he could hear Isabella's breathing, measured, working to stay controlled, and the scrape of her knees on the metal. "You okay?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "No," she said. "Keep moving." He kept moving. After about 90 feet, they reached the first horizontal section, where the shaft widened marginally and turned east along the building's spine. Nathan stopped and listened. The shaft system was a remarkable acoustic conductor. He could hear the building differently from inside it, the way a doctor hears differently through a stethoscope than with a naked ear. He could hear the HVAC fan cycling 2 shafts over. He could hear faintly voices somewhere above. More specifically, he could hear what sounded like Dwayne's voice, which meant Dwayne was alive and somewhere on an upper floor rather than in the safe room where Nathan had told him to go, which was either very bad or meant the safe room had been compromised. "There's a junction in about 40 feet, he told Isabella quietly. "Branch right takes us up to the 4th floor mechanical room. That room has a hardwired terminal with access to the building's security camera system." "You want to see where they are?" she said. "I want to see where they are. And I want to use the building's intercom to reach Dwayne if he's still active. And I want to know if police have made entry yet." "How long ago did your friend call them?" 45, maybe 50 minutes ago now." He paused. Response time for tactical response to an active situation in this part of downtown is 15 to 20 minutes under normal circumstances. They should be outside by now. The question is whether they've made entry. Why wouldn't they? If the outer perimeter is still contested, they'll stage outside. They don't breach until they have eyes on the tactical situation. So we could be waiting, or we move to a position where we can give them information that accelerates their entry decision. He shifted forward. "Come on, don't put your weight on the left wall here. The bracket's been loose for 6 months. You know every loose bracket in this building?" "It's my building," he said simply, and kept moving. They reached the branch junction and took the right shaft upward, and Nathan climbed with the toolbox over his shoulder and his forearms doing most of the work. And after a vertical climb of roughly 15 feet, they reached the access panel for the 4th floor mechanical room. He put his ear to it. Nothing. He worked the panel latch from the inside. He'd designed that modification himself, after the second time he'd gotten stuck in a shaft when the panel was locked from outside. And it swung open. The 4th floor mechanical room was empty and dark, and smelled of motor oil and the faint ozone of electrical systems working hard. Nathan helped Isabella through the panel and then stood and stretched his back once and moved to the terminal on the east wall. The terminal was a legacy system, a green screen monitor connected directly to the building's original security camera infrastructure, predating the modern digital system Dwayne used upstairs. Most people didn't know it existed. Nathan knew about it because he'd had to repair its wiring twice. It was dumb, hardwired, and unbothered by whatever was happening to the networked systems upstairs. He powered it on and navigated through the camera grid. The lobby was wrecked. Both front entry gates had been breached. The vehicles had come through them and were now sitting inside the atrium lobby at angles, their front ends crumpled against the security desk. He counted bodies on the lobby floor, 3, none of them moving, all in security uniforms. Not Nathan's building security. These were the private event guards Orion had brought in for the pre-launch period. Fernandez and Walsh he couldn't see, which was either good or not. The atrium was empty now. The briefing chairs overturned in the pattern of mass evacuation. The podium knocked sideways. The emergency exit showed streams of employees on the exterior cameras. People were getting out, which was the most important thing. He switched to the North Service corridor. 4 men moving in formation, systematic room to room, professional. They were wearing identical gear and moving identically, which told him they'd trained together, which told him this was a contracted team rather than assembled muscle. Someone had spent real money. He switched to the executive floor. 42. 2 men posted outside Isabella's office, not searching, waiting, which meant someone had told them she might head for her own floor, which meant the command element of this operation had specific knowledge of how she was likely to respond under pressure. "Look," he said, and stepped aside. Isabella looked at the screen, at the 2 men outside her office, and her expression went through something he couldn't fully name. Not just fear or anger, but something more specific. The particular betrayal of realizing that someone who knew her had told strangers exactly where she'd run. "Marcus knows I always go back to my office," she said quietly. "I've done it every time there's been a crisis. Every time. He's told me it's a bad habit." Nathan said nothing. "He knew," she said. The words came out flat and final, without effect, the way things sound when you've just confirmed something you'd hoped you were wrong about. "He knew," Nathan said. "Yes." She stood there for a moment with that. He let her stand there, There wasn't anything useful to say that would make the shape of it different. He switched cameras to the garage level and the east side exits and spent 2 minutes assessing. The exits were contested. He could see 2 men in the garage and one posted at the east alley door, but the south emergency exit appeared clear, and on the exterior camera for the south side, he could see something that shifted the calculation considerably. Police vehicles, tactical units, staged at the perimeter half a block south and east. A command vehicle, what looked like a K9 unit. They were there. They were staged. They hadn't gone in yet. He found what he needed in the camera views. The reason they hadn't gone in. A man in a suit. He couldn't make the face clearly on the old camera resolution, but the build and the silver hair were clear enough. Was at the south perimeter, talking to what appeared to be the tactical commander. Talking, not being detained. Talking with authority, with his hands moving, with the body language of someone providing information to people who were listening to him. Marcus is at the south perimeter, Nathan said. He's talking to the tactical team. Isabella looked. Is he telling them? He's controlling what they know. He'll be providing a narrative about what's happening inside, probably positioning himself as the senior executive managing the situation. Nathan's jaw tightened once, briefly. If the tactical commander believes the COO, they'll delay entry. They'll wait for conditions that Marcus will do his best to never declare met. Can we reach them? Tell them what's actually happening? Not directly. Not from here. He looked at the terminal, at the camera grid, and then at the building systems panel on the wall beside it. He was thinking through the geometry of the building, where the teams were, where the police were, what he had available to him. He'd spent 2 years learning this building's systems, not because he'd anticipated this situation, but because he was thorough, and now that thoroughness was the only real asset he had. I can talk to Dwayne, he said. If he's still active and has his radio, I can use the building intercom from this terminal to reach the maintenance frequency, which is separate from the security system Marcus would have been monitoring. And if Dwayne is outside the perimeter, he can give the tactical commander a direct account. Where do you think Dwayne is? Nathan switched cameras until he found him. Third floor east corridor, pressed into an alcove near the stairwell, his radio clipped to his chest, alive and apparently uninjured. Watching a team of 2 search the corridor from the relative concealment of the alcove, very carefully not moving. He's on 3, Nathan said. He's pinned, but he's okay. He switched to the intercom panel. I need to get him out of that corridor before I can reach him. And I need to do it without those 2 men finding him first. He turned away from the terminal and opened his toolbox on the floor and went through it with the focus of someone who understood exactly what each item was and wasn't capable of. 18-inch pipe wrench, channel lock pliers, voltage tester, electrical tape, coil of 14-gauge wire, emergency flashlight, a small can of penetrating oil, 3 spare fuses rated at different amperages, and hanging from a clip on the inside of the lid, his building master key card, laminated, showing his picture and his name and the word maintenance in blue block letters. In this building, that key card opened every mechanical room, every service access panel, every emergency utility override. It opened the steam valve controls on every floor. He looked at the building systems panel, specifically at the zone controls for the steam heat distribution on the 3rd floor. The building used steam heat as its primary system from October through April, and even in late summer the main steam lines ran at partial pressure as a preparatory measure before the season shifted. The zone valve for the 3rd floor north corridor, which was exactly where those 2 men were searching, could be opened remotely from this terminal. A fully open steam zone valve in a corridor would release a substantial quantity of very hot, very pressurized steam from the ceiling vents. Not enough to injure anyone seriously at current pressures, but enough to fill a hallway with blinding white steam in approximately 90 seconds. Enough to make it completely impossible to see and enormously uncomfortable to stand in. Enough to make 2 men who were searching a corridor decide very quickly that the corridor was uninhabitable. It was also loud, which would draw attention from elsewhere. That's a problem for later, he muttered to himself. Isabella had moved beside him and was looking at what he was doing. The steam system? 3rd floor north corridor is running the main lateral. If I open the zone valve, it clears the corridor and gives Dwayne a window to move. He looked at her. It's also going to make noise. And it's going to tell whoever's running this operation that someone with building systems access is active. They'll start looking for the terminal. How long before they find this room? 15 minutes. Maybe 20 if they don't know the building well. He paused. But I can use those 20 minutes. To do what? He looked at her directly. To reduce the odds against us from very bad to manageable. This building has 12 major mechanical junctions, 6 emergency lockdown zones, and 3 independent power circuits. I know how all of them work. The men upstairs know how to shoot. He said it without drama. That's the asymmetry I have to work with. She looked at him for a moment in the low light of the terminal screen, and he saw something shift in her face. Not the soft recalibration of someone changing their mind about a person, but something harder and more honest than that. The look of someone who is genuinely seeing, possibly for the first time, what they'd chosen not to see before. You filed 4 reports, she said. Yes. And She stopped. We can talk about it later. He wasn't being curt. He meant it. Later was a real possibility, and he intended to make it one. Right now, I need you to stay in this room, stay away from the door, and get down behind the secondary boiler unit if you hear anyone in the corridor. It's steel plate, 1/2 inch. It'll stop small arms. Where are you going? He picked up the pipe wrench and clipped the master keycard to his chest and looked at her. I'm going to go make this building very difficult to be in, he said, if you're not me. He was out the door before she could respond, moving down the service corridor at a controlled pace, his footsteps careful on the concrete, the wrench hanging at his side. The fluorescent strips in this corridor were on a timer, and 2 of them were dead. He'd noted that on his maintenance list on Monday, a detail that had felt routine then and felt like luck now. The 3rd floor north corridor was 2 floors up by the emergency stairwell and then through the crossover passage that connected the north and south mechanical systems. He moved up the stairs without sound in the way of someone who had spent years learning how to move without sound, and he reached the crossover passage and stopped at the door and listened. Through the door he could hear the steam lines running, the constant low-pressure hiss that was background to every floor's mechanical reality. Inaudible when you were used to it and unavoidable once you started noticing it. He could hear, further away, the search team moving, slow, methodical. They were doing it right. He found the zone valve junction for the 3rd floor north. It was a manual wheel with a secondary electronic override, and the electronic override was tied to the system he'd just left. But the manual wheel was right here, 4 feet off the floor on the main steam lateral. He put both hands on it and turned. The response was not immediate. There was a 2-second delay as pressure equalized through the lateral. And then the ceiling vents in the north corridor beyond the door began to exhale. Not explosively, not violently, just a steady building release of steam, white and thick, filling the corridor from the ceiling down. He heard voices from beyond the door, confusion, then a short, sharp exchange, then the sound of boots on concrete moving back fast, away from the steam. Moving toward the south end of the corridor, away from Dwayne's alcove. Nathan took out his phone and texted Dwayne, North corridor, go now, get outside, find the tactical commander, tell them Marcus Sterling is compromised, tell them I'm active inside, go. He watched the read receipt appear. 3 seconds, then, understood, going. Nathan leaned against the wall for a moment in the warm hiss of the steam corridor and breathed once, slowly, all the way out. Upstairs, 2 floors above him, the men who'd come for Isabella were beginning to understand that the building they'd so carefully mapped from the outside was different on the inside, that it had a logic they hadn't accounted for, that somewhere in its corridors and shafts and mechanical rooms there was someone who knew it better than they did, who was moving through it without their permission, who was pulling at threads they hadn't considered. He pushed off the wall and moved back toward the stairwell. He needed to get to the 7th floor mechanical junction before they found the terminal on 4. The 7th floor junction housed the building's emergency lighting override, the elevator mechanical controls, and the access point for the main ventilation bypass. He was already planning the sequence. What to lock down first, what to isolate, how to herd rather than confront. He was, without having chosen it, in the work he'd been trained for, the work he'd walked away from, the work he was better at than almost anything else. He didn't feel good about that exactly, but he didn't feel bad about it either. He just moved. The seventh-floor mechanical junction was the size of a small apartment and twice as loud. A compressed universe of pipes and pressure gauges and electrical conduits that ran in every direction like the nervous system of something enormous. Nathan had spent 3 days up here in March, when a secondary pump had failed and flooded the east wing maintenance shaft, and he knew the room the way you know a place after you've been frustrated by it. Intimately, imperfectly, with the specific knowledge that comes from things going wrong. He got there in 4 minutes from the third-floor steam valve, moving through the service stairs and the crossover corridors with the lights off, navigating by memory and the pale emergency strip lighting that ran along the baseboards. He'd killed the main corridor lights on floors 3 through 8 using the circuit breakers in the crossover passage junction box. A decision that cost the search teams their visibility and cost him nothing, since he didn't need light to move through spaces he already carried in his head. The junction room had 3 things he needed. The first was the elevator mechanical control panel, which was hardwired and separate from the building's networked systems, and which allowed him to manually freeze any of the building's 9 elevators in place. He locked 6 of them, leaving the service elevator on the east side free because he might need it, and leaving 2 on the upper floors stationary with their doors open, which would tell the search teams there was movement on the upper floors and pull attention upward and away from the basement where Isabella was. The second thing was the ventilation bypass. The building's main HVAC system had an emergency bypass mode designed for fire response, which could be used to reverse the airflow in specific zones. Instead of circulating air, it would pull air out, creating negative pressure in targeted corridors. In practical terms, if you opened a fire door in a negative pressure zone, the door became dramatically harder to open against the suction, and the airflow noise was disorienting enough to compromise communication between people in the zone. He set negative pressure on floors 9 through 12, where 2 of the search teams appeared to be concentrating based on what he'd seen on the camera terminal. The third thing was a phone, a hardwired building maintenance line, not connected to the main communication system, installed in the junction rooms at every odd-numbered floor as a legacy system from the building's original construction. He picked it up and got a dial tone and called the only number he could think of that might reach someone outside the building who could help right now. His ex-wife answered on the second ring. "Nathan, I'm fine. Mia's fine. I know about the news. I need you to do something." A pause. He could hear her breathing go from panicked to focused. Whatever she felt about him personally, she was practical when it mattered, and he'd always respected that about her. "What do you need?" "I need you to call Seattle PD Dispatch, not 911, the direct number for the tactical division. Tell them you have a source inside the Orion Nexus building who confirms that Marcus Sterling, the company's COO, is providing false information to the incident commander at the South Perimeter. Tell them the source requests that tactical entry proceed without clearance from Sterling. Can you do that?" "I can do that." "Nathan, she's fine. She's at Mrs. Pacheco's. Call the number." He hung up. It wasn't a perfect solution. A call from an unknown civilian about a corporate executive at the perimeter was a low-credibility input to a tactical commander who was already managing a complex situation. But it was another thread, another voice, another source pulling in the same direction as Dwayne. Enough threads and someone would start paying attention to the pattern. He moved to the room's access panel and listened at the door for 30 seconds before opening it. The corridor was dark and still, and smelled of dust and the faint ghost of cleaning solution from the morning crew. He moved east along it, counting doors, and stopped at the third one. Maintenance storage. The room where the building kept spare parts, materials, and the industrial equipment that was too large for individual crew lockers. He had a key. He let himself in. What he wanted was in the back corner on the metal shelving. 2 cans of compressed air, the kind used for cleaning electrical panels. A coil of high-test braided steel cable, 1/8-inch diameter, used for securing equipment during maintenance work, and a case of emergency flares, the chemical kind rated for 30 minutes, which the building kept for power failure scenarios in the parking structure. He also took a heavy canvas work apron off its hook by the door. He was building the shape of something in his head. Not a plan exactly, because plans in this kind of situation had a habit of failing the moment they met other people's decisions, but a framework, a way of using what he had. The building was the asset. The building was enormous and complex, and he understood it and they didn't. And the only way to defeat a search team with superior firepower was to make the environment work harder than they could. He was back in the service corridor with his collected materials when he heard it. A radio. Not a building radio, but a tactical radio. The compressed squawk of encrypted comms, close, very close. 1 floor above him, by the sound. Moving. He pressed himself into a doorway and went completely still. The technique was old and simple, and surprisingly effective. The human eye processes motion before shape. If you're not moving, and the light is low, and you're against a background that has texture, you become very difficult to see even for someone who's looking. He'd learned it in places where the penalty for being seen was permanent, and the learning had gone deep enough that it was now simply a thing his body knew how to do. The footsteps passed on the floor above. 2 sets, moving east. He waited 10 additional seconds after the sound faded, then moved. He was back at the 4th floor mechanical room in 6 minutes. He knocked in the pattern he'd established with Isabella before he left. 3 slow, 2 fast, and heard the bolt on the inside slide back. The door opened 4 inches, and then all the way. She looked at him with a specific kind of relief that she immediately rearranged into something more composed, which he understood. She'd been alone in a dark mechanical room for the better part of 40 minutes, not knowing if he was coming back. Dwayne got out, he said immediately, because that was the thing she'd want to know first. I texted him. He should be at the perimeter. She exhaled once. Okay. I also made contact outside. We have 2 independent sources now telling the tactical commander that Sterling is compromised. He set his collected materials on the workbench and looked at her. How are you doing? I found a granola bar in the work cabinet, she said. I ate it. I have no idea whose it was. I don't care. It was mine, he said. You're welcome. Something almost like a short laugh. Not quite, but in the vicinity. There's a camera terminal in here. I've been watching. He looked at the secondary terminal. The building had these on every 4th floor in the mechanical rooms, feeding from the same legacy camera grid. She'd been watching it. He moved to look at what she'd found. 3 things, she said, coming to stand beside him. The team in the North Corridor moved off after your steam trick. They went to 8. The 2 men outside my office are still there. She pointed at the screen. And this. She'd cued the south exterior camera. Marcus Sterling was still at the perimeter, but now he was sitting in the back of a police vehicle, speaking to 2 plainclothes individuals who had the careful posture of detectives or federal agents. From the body language, it was not a friendly conversation. Dwayne got to them, Nathan said. Someone did. She crossed her arms over her chest. He's going to try to talk his way out of it. He's very good at that. What's he going to say? He'll say whatever the situation requires. He'll be concerned. He'll be cooperative. He'll be the senior executive doing everything he can to assist law enforcement. Her voice was flat. He'll say my maintenance technician has been harassing him with unfounded security complaints for a week and may be unstable. He'll say he has no idea who those men are. He'll say he's as shocked as anyone. She paused. And he'll be completely convincing because he's done it before. Nathan looked at her. Not this, she said quickly. I mean, in negotiations, with difficult investors, in depositions. He has a way of becoming the most credible person in any room. She uncrossed her arms. We need evidence, something concrete. They can hold him for 40 minutes, maybe an hour, based on Dwayne's account. But without something material, where does he keep his operational files? His office, 41, but he has a secondary terminal, a personal laptop he brings in, not connected to Orion's network. He keeps it in his office safe. What's in it? If I'm right about what he's done? Her voice didn't waver, but something in it went tight. Everything. He runs all the COO level operations, subsidiary relationships, vendor contracts, financial flows. If he set up shell companies to route payments to this operation, the architecture would be on that laptop. Nathan thought about the 2 men posted outside her office on 42. He thought about Sterling's personal office on 41, 1 floor below. He thought about the service shaft that ran between the 2 floors in the building's northeast corner, and about the access panel in the 41st floor mechanical room that sat 12 feet from Sterling's office door. I need you to stay here, he said. You said that the last time. I mean it the same way I meant it then. You're going to 41. It wasn't a question. If I can get to his office before the search teams consolidate, I can get the laptop out of the safe. He picked up the master keycard. Building master opens mechanical rooms. Sterling's office has a secondary lock that overrides the master. He looked at her. What's his override code? He changes it quarterly. Last change was 6 weeks ago, she thought. He uses date sequences. His daughter's birthday is March 14th. The code is probably 0314 followed by something. The year she was born? 2001. 0314, 0114, or 0314, 2001. He'd use the birthday format consistently. 0314, 2001. He repeated it once in his head and committed it. If I'm not back in 25 minutes and you hear tactical entry on the upper floors, they'll make a specific breach sound, louder than anything these men are doing. You take the south service shaft to the ground level east exit, and you go directly to whoever is in uniform. Don't stop. Don't look for me. She looked at him with an expression that had several things in it at once. And if you're not back in 25 minutes and I don't hear a tactical breach? He picked up the work apron and the cable coil and 2 of the flares. Then use your judgment. Nathan. She said his name the way she had in the basement, deliberately, the way you say something you mean to actually land. Be careful. He looked at her for a moment. She was standing in a dark mechanical room in her blazer and stockinged feet, her hair partly fallen from where it had been this morning, a granola bar wrapper on the workbench beside her. She looked nothing like the woman who had handed him $20 in the lobby with that particular dismissive efficiency. She looked like a person. Lock the door behind me, he said, and left. The service shaft between 4 and 7 was a familiar path by now. He moved through it with the cable coil over one shoulder and the toolbox in hand, the flares tucked into his jacket pockets. He was thinking about the layout of 41 as he moved. Sterling's office was in the northeast corner, a corner office with windows facing 2 directions, which meant 2 exterior walls and 2 interior walls, which meant 2 possible approach angles from inside the floor. He came out of the shaft at the 7th floor, moved through the service corridor to the secondary stairwell, and went up. Not rushing. Controlled pace, silent footwork, listening at every landing. 8, 9, 10. The search teams he'd displaced with the steam and the ventilation were still on 8 and 9. He could hear them, distantly, through the stairwell walls. 11, 12, clear. He was moving through the gap he'd created, the space his displacement tactics had opened up. 30, 31. He paused longer here listening. 2 of the search teams that had been on the upper floors were unaccounted for. He didn't like unaccounted for. He eased the stairwell door open at 32 and looked down the corridor. Empty. He crossed to the East Wing service corridor and took it north to the access point for the shaft running between 41 and 42. The access panel was behind a utility cabinet. He moved the cabinet, which took 30 seconds and made more noise than he wanted, opened the panel, and went in. The shaft between these 2 floors was vertical and tight, about 18 inches wide, and smelled powerfully of the spray foam insulation that had been added 4 years ago during a renovation. He went up 12 feet to the 41st floor access and stopped with his hand on the panel latch and listened. He heard breathing, close. 1 person, on the other side of the panel or very close to it. He stayed completely still and worked through the possibilities. A surviving employee who'd hidden on the floor. One of the search team checking this access point. The breathing was slow and deliberate, not frightened, not exerted. Someone waiting. He thought about the camera terminal, the 2 men on 42. He hadn't seen anyone posted on 41 because he hadn't had time to cycle through every floor camera before he left, which meant he'd made an assumption about where the threat was. He counted to 15 in his head. The breathing didn't change rhythm. Whoever it was, they were patient. He thought about the flares in his jacket. He thought about the 18-inch shaft and the access panel, and what happened in a closed space when someone on the other side didn't know exactly where you were. He opened the panel fast and went through it sideways with the flare lit in his left hand and the pipe wrench in his right. The man on the other side was good. He'd been posted at the access panel specifically. Someone in the operation had been smart enough to anticipate that someone with building knowledge might use the maintenance shafts, and he came up fast with a weapon in a 2-handed grip. But the flare was already in his face, not thrown, held, close, the magnesium light of it at full chemical bloom filling the space between them with a white intensity that overwhelmed everything. The man recoiled and his aim broke left, and Nathan closed the distance in one step and brought the pipe wrench up in a controlled arc that hit the man's weapon hand rather than his head. Nathan wasn't trying to hurt him more than necessary. He was trying to disarm, and the wrench across the wrist accomplished that cleanly. The weapon clattered across the floor. The man tried to recover, going for Nathan's jacket with his undamaged hand, and Nathan let him get the grip and used the momentum to turn him. And they went into the wall together, Nathan behind him now. And Nathan had his arm, and the man's weight was working against him, and after about 4 seconds, the man went down to his knees, and Nathan used the cable coil to secure his wrist to a pipe-mounting bracket on the wall. It was not elegant. The man was bleeding from a cut on his forehead where he'd hit the wall, and Nathan's shoulder was screaming. He'd taken the wall impact on the same shoulder he'd been favoring since a training injury 3 years ago that had never properly healed. He stepped back and breathed. The man looked up at him from the floor with an expression that had shifted from professional threat assessment to something more complicated. Nathan was in a maintenance uniform with a pipe wrench and a spent chemical flare, and he'd just taken the man's weapon and his mobility in about 6 seconds. The expression made sense. "Who sent you?" Nathan said. It wasn't inflected as a question. The man said nothing. "I already know it's Sterling. I don't need that confirmed. I need to know how many of you are between me and his office." Nothing. Nathan looked at him for a moment, then looked at the corridor. Sterling's office was 40 feet east. The floor was quiet. One man posted at the access panel probably meant one man at the office door and nobody else. The search team couldn't be everywhere, and they'd concentrated their upper floor coverage on the locations they'd expected Isabella to be. He picked up the man's weapon, a compact semi-automatic that he cleared and safed without looking at it, the motion automatic, and left him secured to the pipe bracket and moved east. Sterling's office door had 2 locks, the building master that Nathan's keycard handled and the secondary electronic keypad. He swiped the master. The keypad blinked its waiting cursor. He typed 03142001. The light went green. The office was large and meticulously ordered. Sterling's desk clear, except for a monitor and an inbox with 3 folders. The bookshelves arranged with the precision of someone who uses physical order to project a particular kind of authority. The safe was behind the painting on the north wall, which was the most predictable location in the world, and Nathan found it with 0 effort. The safe had a combination dial. He didn't know the combination. He stood in front of it for a moment and thought about what he had: a pipe wrench, a keycard, cable, and the knowledge of this building. The safe was a mid-grade office model, not bank quality, built to deter opportunistic access rather than sustain professional effort. The hinge side was on the left, which told him the mechanism was on the right. He took the penetrating oil from his toolkit, the small can he'd brought from the storage room, and ran a thin bead along the dial shaft where it met the door face. Gave it 45 seconds. Then he put the pipe wrench on the dial and applied lateral pressure, not to turn it, but to put the mechanism under sideways stress, and while holding that pressure, he turned the handle. It was the kind of thing that worked maybe 30% of the time on this class of safe, when the locking bolts were already worn and the mechanism was under lateral load. A proper locked safe didn't yield to it. A safe that had been opened and closed 100 times by someone who was usually in a hurry sometimes did. The bolts retracted. He released the breath he'd been holding. The laptop was inside, along with 3 external drives and a folder of physical documents. He took all of it, loaded it into the canvas work apron, tied the apron into a bundle, and was back in the corridor in under 2 minutes. He was heading for the stairwell access when the corridor lights came on. All of them, simultaneously, full brightness. Someone had overridden his lighting shutdowns from a central panel, which meant the search teams had found the building's central control room on 36, the one Nathan hadn't been able to lock down because getting to it would have taken him through 2 floors of active search activity. He was standing in a lit corridor with a bundle of stolen evidence under one arm and the secured weapon in his waistband, and at the far end of the corridor, 40 feet away, 2 men in tactical gear had just come through the fire door and were looking directly at him. They shouted. He ran. Not for the stairwells, though they were between him and the stairwell. He ran west, down the corridor, and turned north into the cross corridor and hit the door to the mechanical room at the end of it with his shoulder because he didn't have time to work the keycard, except the door was already unlatched, had been unlatched since he'd come through it earlier, and it swung open and he went through it and pulled it shut and got the bolt thrown before the running footsteps reached the corridor outside. The mechanical room on 41. Smaller than the ones on the lower floors, mostly housing the HVAC distribution manifold for this section of the building. He was out of corridor, out of shaft access from this room. The two men outside were going to either breach the door or call for backup, or both. He looked at the HVAC manifold. The manifold served the northeast quadrant of floors 38 through 44. The distribution ducts were large, 12-inch square, which wasn't the same as the crawl space shafts but was adjacent to them, and the manifold itself sat on a raised platform that backed against the building's exterior wall. The exterior wall. He looked at the wall and then at the manifold platform and then at the cable coil over his shoulder. On the exterior of the building, between floors, there were window washing anchor points, steel brackets set into the facade at every floor level, rated to 800 pounds, installed as part of the building's maintenance infrastructure. Nathan had personally inspected 4 of them during his first 6 months on the job. He knew which floor's exterior brackets were accessible from which mechanical rooms. 41 Northeast Mechanical Room had a maintenance hatch, code required, external access for facade inspection, in the exterior wall behind the manifold. He'd used it exactly once, during an exterior vent inspection in February. The bolt on the door behind him jumped as someone hit it from outside. He moved to the manifold platform, climbed over it, reached the maintenance hatch, and worked its exterior latch. The hatch swung out. Cold air and the sound of Seattle 41 floors up came in together. Wind, distant traffic, the mechanical whine of the city. The sky was a deep gray that had given up on rain for the moment. He looked down once, noted the anchor bracket 12 inches below the hatch, and then very deliberately did not look down again. The cable in his coil was 30 feet of high-test braided steel. He looped it twice through the anchor bracket and knotted it with a load-rated bowline, the kind of knot that tightened under tension rather than slipping, and he tested it twice before he put his weight on it. The door behind him burst open. He went out the hatch. 41 floors of empty air below his feet, and Seattle spread out around him going in every direction. The sound of the wind immediate and enormous. The cable burning through his gloves as he paid it out, his boots finding the exterior wall and walking it. 3 seconds. 5. The anchor bracket for the 40th floor slid past his right hip, and he grabbed it with his left hand and held, swinging slightly, the bundle of materials under his right arm doing everything it could to pull him sideways. He looked up. One of the men was at the hatch, looking down at him. Not following. Smart. He looked down. The 39th floor maintenance hatch was 6 feet below him, close enough that with the cable paid to its end and his arm fully extended to the 40th floor bracket, he could reach it. The latch was exterior accessible, same design as the one above. He worked it open with 3 fingers and went through it and landed hard on the platform inside, his right knee taking most of the impact, the bundle of materials intact. He lay on the platform for about 5 seconds and stared at the ceiling of the 39th floor mechanical room and let his heart do what it needed to do. His shoulder was very unhappy with him. He sat up and rotated it carefully and determined that it was functional and that the pain was something he could set aside, and he set it aside. He had the laptop, the drives, and the documents. He had 1 floor between him and the stairwell access that led to the safe route back down. He got up and moved to the door and listened and eased it open, and the 39th floor corridor was empty, and the elevator at the end of it was frozen with its doors open exactly as he'd set it 2 hours ago. And he moved to the stairwell and went in and started down. He was on the 22nd floor when it happened. He never heard the man behind him, which meant the man was either very well trained or had been waiting in the stairwell specifically, and when Nathan reached the landing between 22 and 21, the door behind him opened and something hit him in the back left shoulder with a force that went through him like a live wire. He knew immediately what it was. The sound came a fraction of a second after the impact, a flat crack that the concrete stairwell threw in 3 different directions at once, and the impact itself was high and left and had gone through the meat of the shoulder without hitting the joint, which he assessed in the same moment he was going down, rolling with the fall rather than against it, protecting the bundle of materials with his body. He hit the landing wall and stopped, Behind him, the man was coming down the stairs fast. Nathan looked up and saw the weapon coming up and made the only available decision, which was to throw the pipe wrench. He threw it hard and flat, and it caught the man across the forearm, and the second shot went into the stairwell wall 2 feet above Nathan's head, and Nathan was already moving, getting upright despite the shoulder which was very loudly registering its objection to everything, and he crossed the landing in 2 steps and hit the man low, under the weapon arm, and drove him into the railing. The railing held. The weapon didn't. It went over the railing and clattered down the stairwell toward the lower floors, and the man grabbed for Nathan's jacket, and they went sideways together, and Nathan put his good shoulder into it and drove the man down onto the landing with his full weight. He was bigger than the man, and heavier, and had more to lose, and after about 8 seconds of things that were not clean or skillful but were effective, the man stopped resisting. Nathan sat back against the wall, breathing hard. His left hand pressed to his shoulder where the blood was soaking through the shirt. He looked at his hand. The blood was dark and coming steadily but not spurting, which confirmed what he'd assessed in the first second, through and through muscle damage, not arterial. Survivable. Painful. He used the last of his cable to secure the man to the stair railing. He picked up the bundle of materials. He held his left arm against his chest and went down the remaining stairs. On the 4th floor when he knocked in the pattern, 3 slow, 2 fast, and the bolt slid back and the door opened and Isabella saw him. She didn't say anything for a moment. She looked at his shoulder, at his hand, at his face. "Sit down," she said. "I need to—" "Sit down, Nathan." He sat on the floor with his back against the secondary boiler, and she crouched in front of him and pulled his hand away from the shoulder, and looked at the wound with the focused directness of someone who was not going to allow herself to react to it until she'd assessed it. "It's through and through," he said. "Left posterior shoulder, didn't hit the joint." "I can see that." She pulled off her blazer without hesitating and folded it into a firm pad and pressed it to the entry point, and took his hand and put it over the pad. "Hold this. Hard." He held it. She looked at the bundle of materials, at the laptop visible through the apron ties. Something moved through her expression. "You got it," she said. "Safe was a cheap model." He tried to shift and winced. "There's also drives and physical documents." She looked at his face. He looked back at her. They were approximately 3 feet apart in a dark mechanical room, with the building making its sounds around them, and he was bleeding on her blazer, and the situation had the specific stripped-down quality of extreme circumstances where there was nothing left to be but exactly what you were. "Why did you do this?" she asked. It came out quiet and genuine, without the executive register. "You could have gotten out. You got Dwayne out. You had a path." He thought about it honestly. "Because it wasn't finished," he said. "And because if Sterling walks away from this, it doesn't matter what those men did today. He'll find another way." "That's not the only reason." He held her gaze. "No," he said, "it's not." She didn't ask for the other reason. Maybe she already knew it, or maybe she understood that some things didn't need to be said in order to be true. She stayed where she was and kept pressure on the wound. And from somewhere above them in the building they heard it, the sound he'd described to her earlier, the specific concussive impact of a tactical breach, louder than anything the mercenaries had done, followed by the kind of authoritative shouting that belonged to people who were trained and had warrants and were done waiting. The tactical team had made entry. Isabella's eyes went to the ceiling and then back to Nathan. "That's them," he said. "That's them," she agreed. His phone buzzed on the floor beside him. "Dwayne from outside. Team is in. Building is being cleared floor by floor. Stay put and make noise when they reach you. Do not move toward them without calling out first." Nathan typed back one-handed. 4th floor mechanical room, east wing. "Injured. We have Sterling's materials. Passed to the commander." He set the phone down and leaned his head back against the boiler and closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. The building groaned above them as the tactical teams moved through it floor by floor, and somewhere in the mechanical labyrinth that Nathan Cole had spent 2 years learning and 45 minutes turning into a battlefield, the last of the men who had come for Isabella Vaughn were running out of places to go. He'd given them a building that had no good corners left in it. That had been the plan. He pressed his hand harder against the blazer on his shoulder and breathed through the pain and waited. They found Nathan and Isabella 40 minutes after tactical entry, which was how long it took the team to clear floors 1 through 6 and reach the fourth floor mechanical room with its bolt thrown from the inside. Nathan had heard them coming, the specific cadence of a professional sweep, room by room, the shouted clearance calls bouncing through the corridors. And he'd warned Isabella, and they'd both called out loudly and identified themselves before the door came open. The officer who found them was young, mid-20s, and he had the particular look of someone whose adrenaline had been running hot for an hour and was now having to rapidly recalibrate. The threat assessment pivot from potential hostile to injured civilian that required a different part of the brain entirely. He cleared the room, called it in, and crouched next to Nathan with a first aid kit open before Nathan had finished explaining who they were. "Gunshot, left posterior shoulder," Nathan said. "I can see that, sir. Can you tell me?" "Through and through. Missed the joint. Pressure's been applied for approximately 35 minutes. He nodded at the folded blazer, which had done its job and was now thoroughly ruined. "Bleeding's slowed." The officer looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between professional and baffled. "You assessed your own—" "I have some medical training. I'm fine. She's not injured." He looked at Isabella. "She needs to speak to whoever's running the command element. She has information about the operation's origin that the commander needs immediately." Isabella was already on her feet. Her stockings were torn, her hair was entirely down from whatever it had been that morning, and she was holding the bundled canvas apron with Sterling's laptop and drives against her chest with both arms. She looked at the young officer with the focused directness of someone who had run a company for 7 years and was not unaccustomed to being the most important person in a room. "I need to speak to your commander," she said. "Right now, not in 10 minutes." The officer got on his radio. They took Nathan out on a stretcher, which he objected to and which they did anyway, and Isabella walked beside it through the building's east corridor and out through the service exit into the cold Seattle afternoon. The clouds had broken open while they'd been underground, and there was actual daylight coming through the gray in patches, and the air was cold and smelled of rain and the particular urban mixture of wet concrete and traffic. Nathan squinted at it like a person coming out of a theater. Outside, the scene had the organized chaos of a large law enforcement operation in its immediate aftermath. Tactical vehicles, marked units, ambulances. A command vehicle parked diagonally on the closed street. News vans had gathered behind the outer perimeter, cameras on the building. Somewhere in the crowd of emergency personnel, Nathan could hear Dwayne's voice before he could see him. "There! That's them! Right there! That's them!" Dwayne came through the perimeter gap at a pace that was technically not running, but covered ground like running, and he looked at Nathan on the stretcher and then at the bandaging on Nathan's shoulder, and his face went through something complicated. "Man," he said. "Man." "I'm fine," Nathan said. "You got shot." "Barely. That's not—" Dwayne stopped, collected himself. "That's not how that phrase works." Nathan almost smiled. "Did you reach the commander?" Eventually, it took a while. Sterling had them convinced for about 20 minutes. I'll give him that. The man can talk. But then your call came in from outside, and they had 2 separate sources. And then when they ran Sterling's name against the financial investigation that the FBI has been doing on a series of corporate fraud cases in the Pacific Northwest, Nathan looked at him. Sterling was already being investigated? Not him specifically, but one of the shell companies that kept coming up in their investigation has a beneficial ownership structure that traces back to a holding company that Sterling controls. Dwayne said it like he'd been practicing the language. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit had flagged it 8 months ago, but hadn't connected it to Orion yet. When they ran his name today, it lit up. Isabella had stopped walking. She was listening with the stillness of someone fitting pieces together that had been in front of her for a long time without forming a coherent picture. "The Crestline Group," she said quietly. Dwayne looked at her. "You know it?" "It's a holding company that was part of a vendor contract we signed 2 years ago. Marcus brought it to us as a logistics infrastructure partner. We paid them for services over 18 months. She paused. "I signed off on the initial contract. The amounts were normal. I never looked at the actual ownership." She said the last sentence like she was reading charges against herself. "Sterling used the vendor relationship to route money out of Orion into accounts he controlled," Nathan said from the stretcher. He'd been listening. "And when Orion's value got high enough, With the launch platform ready to go, he decided acquisition was more profitable than embezzlement. Take the company, take the platform, take everything. What? He would have needed board support to take over after... She stopped herself before finishing the sentence. After you were gone. She didn't say it. He'd been building that for months. 3 of our board members have strong relationships with his outside investors. If he controlled the company and had the launch platform, the acquisition play would have been worth 8, 9 figures to the right buyer. And you were the only obstacle, Nathan said. I'm always the only obstacle, she said, and it came out with a weight behind it that wasn't self-pity, but was something close to exhaustion. The exhaustion of being the person who'd built something and now had to face how close she'd come to losing it to someone she'd trusted with its operations. The commander was a compact woman named Lieutenant Chen, who had the efficient manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to cut directly to what mattered. She met them at the command vehicle, looked at Nathan briefly, looked at the canvas bundle Isabella was still holding, and said, "Is that the sterling materials?" "Laptop, 3 external drives, physical documents," Nathan said, taken from his personal safe on 41. "We'll need a chain of custody statement." "I know. I'll give you whatever you need." "You broke into his safe." "I opened a combination lock using a mechanical technique that doesn't damage the mechanism. The safe is intact. The door was locked by the building master override that is part of my standard maintenance responsibilities." He met her eyes steadily. "The keycard that opened Sterling's office door is logged every time it's used. The log will show my authorized maintenance access." Lieutenant Chen looked at him for a long moment. "You have an interesting definition of authorized maintenance access." "I maintain the building's security infrastructure," Nathan said. "Today that included preventing a hostile takeover of its executive leadership." Something moved behind Chen's professional expression that might, in a different context, have been appreciation. "You're going to need a lawyer." "I know. The materials may not be immediately admissible depending on how the entry is characterized." "I understand, but they'll tell you where to look, and what you find on your own through proper channels will be admissible. And you now know exactly where to look." He paused. "That was the point." Chen took the canvas bundle from Isabella with gloved hands. "I'll need statements from both of you, him after the paramedics." She looked at Nathan. "Go with them now. That shoulder is not as fine as you think it is." Nathan went with the paramedics. The trauma was a through-and-through soft tissue wound to the posterior deltoid, which was exactly what Nathan had assessed from the floor of the stairwell. The paramedic who worked on him was a heavy-set man named Torres, who had the relaxed efficiency of someone who had been doing field medicine for a long time and was not impressed by people who self-diagnosed. "Through-and-through soft tissue," Torres said, packing the wound. "That's what I said. You also lost more blood than you think. Your pressure's lower than it should be." He wrapped it firmly. "Hospital. Tonight." I have things..." "Hospital," Torres said, with the tone of a man who had heard every version of "I have things" and was done negotiating with it. Nathan lay on the stretcher and looked at the gray Seattle sky and felt the specific post-event flatness that he recognized from other times. The body's accounting of what it had spent, the costs becoming visible once the immediate demand was gone. His shoulder ached with a deep, persistent throb. His knee, where he'd landed hard coming through the 39th floor hatch, was stiffening. His hands were cut from the cable and the concrete wall. He was thinking about Mia. He pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Pacheco. "Nathan, the news?" "I know. I'm outside. I'm okay. I have a minor injury. Is she..." "She's been in the kitchen with me since you called. I didn't turn the TV on." A pause. "She made a drawing. She made you a drawing of the 2 of you at the park. She said to tell you she made it for when you got home." He was quiet for a moment. "Tell her I'll be home tonight. Tell her I'll be there for dinner." "Are you sure you'll..." "Yes. I'll be there for dinner." He put the phone down. Torres was watching him with the particular expression medical professionals develop for the moments when the people they're treating become real to them beyond the wound. "Kid?" Torres asked. 6 years old. "That'll get you through a lot." "Yeah," Nathan said. "It will." Across the closed street behind the perimeter tape, the cameras were running. He could see the telephoto lenses from here, could see the reporters doing their stand-ups with the Orion Nexus building behind them. He was in a work uniform on a stretcher, which was not how most people ended up on the 6 o'clock news. and he had a feeling about what was coming that he didn't entirely welcome. He was right about that. The first news cycle ran his name by 7 that evening, maintenance worker Nathan Cole, with the grainy exterior camera footage that had captured him entering the East Service exit at the start of his shift and the footage of him being brought out on the stretcher after tactical clearance. By the morning, the story had been reported by every major outlet, and Maintenance Worker Saves CEO was the kind of headline that traveled in the way certain stories do when they hit the particular frequency that people are already tuned to. The real person hiding in plain sight, the invisible man who turned out to be something else entirely. Nathan watched approximately none of this. He was at Harborview Medical Center getting his shoulder properly cleaned and sutured, and then he was in a hospital room eating a meal that was not good but was hot. And then at 10:15 his daughter was sitting on the edge of his hospital bed in her pajamas because Mrs. Pacheco had brought her when visiting hours were technically over, and the night nurse had let them through because some rules exist to protect patients, and some rules exist because nobody updated them. And Mia had looked at his bandaged shoulder with the focused concern of a 6-year-old who understood that something bad had happened without understanding the full shape of it. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "A little. It's getting better." "Mrs. Pacheco said you were being a hero." "Mrs. Pacheco is being generous." Mia considered this. She was sitting very close to him, her small weight pressing against his good side. The drawing she'd made still rolled up in her hand. "What does generous mean?" "It means she's saying nicer things about me than I deserve." Mia thought about that. "Connor at school is not generous," she said. "He said my drawings are dumb." "Connor at school has not seen this drawing," Nathan said. "Can I see it?" She unrolled it. 2 figures at a park, a tall one and a small one, both with wildly oversized heads and small stick bodies, holding hands near a tree that was mostly a brown line with green scribbles on top. The sky was 3 blue lines. The grass was 4 green lines. Both figures had enormous smiles. He looked at it for a long moment. "That's the best drawing I've ever seen," he said. She leaned against his arm. "I know," she said simply, with the uncomplicated certainty of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned to qualify her own work. And he sat in the hospital room and held the drawing carefully in his good hand. He got out of the hospital on Thursday morning. The news cycle had done what news cycles do, which was accelerate and amplify and strip away context in favor of narrative. And the version of him that existed in public coverage by Thursday was already somewhat unrecognizable. A decorated former Navy SEAL who had been working incognito, as several outlets put it, as though he'd chosen a maintenance career as a tactical cover rather than because it was honest work that fit his life. He declined every call from media. He ignored the interview requests. He went home and he slept. On Friday afternoon, Isabella Vaughn came to his apartment. He'd known she would. She had called ahead, which he'd appreciated, and he'd said, "Come whenever you want." And when the knock came at 2:15, he was in the kitchen making coffee because that was what he did when he wasn't sure what else to do. The apartment was what it was. A 2-bedroom in a building off Jackson Street that was clean and functional and decorated in the style of a man who had prioritized his daughter's room over his own. So her space had color and drawings on the wall and a small shelf of books organized in a way that made sense to a 6-year-old. And his space had a bed and a lamp and a chair with a book on it. The living room had a couch, a television, and a collection of Mia's artwork that had gradually colonized most of the available wall space. Isabella stood in the doorway for a moment before he stepped back and let her in. She was in dark jeans and a gray sweater, her hair down, no blazer. She looked different without the armor of executive presentation. Not smaller, but more dimensional, like a photograph that had developed its depth. She looked at the walls, at the drawings. "She's prolific," Isabella said. "She goes through paper at a rate I can't fully account for." He went back to the kitchen. "Coffee?" "Please." He poured 2 cups and brought them to the table, and they sat down across from each other. And there was a moment of the particular awkwardness that exists between 2 people who have been through something extreme together and are now in the ordinary conditions of a kitchen table and coffee cups, needing to find the register for that. Isabella put both hands around her cup and looked at him directly. "I came to apologize," she said. "In person, without a communications team or a prepared statement. You don't need to—" I do. I need you to let me." She held his eyes. What I did in the lobby on Tuesday morning was wrong. Not just impolite, wrong. I made a decision about who you were based on what you were carrying and what you were wearing, and I treated you accordingly. And the fact that it turned out you were a decorated veteran who saved my life doesn't make what I did retroactively okay. I'd have been wrong to do it to anyone. He was quiet. I've been doing that for years, she said. Not just with you, with a lot of people. I convinced myself that it was efficient, that assessing people by their demonstrated output was just being realistic. But that's not what I was doing. I was protecting myself from the complexity of actually seeing people. It's easier to manage people when they're reduced. She stopped. I'm sorry, genuinely, not because of what happened after. Before it. Nathan drank his coffee. He looked at her. I know, he said. That's it? What else would you like me to say? She opened her hands. Most people would have more to say. Most people would be angry. I was angry, he said. On Tuesday morning in the maintenance station, I was angry. I've been angry about that kind of thing in various forms for most of my adult life. He set the cup down. But you came here. You sat down. You said the thing that was hard to say without making it easier on yourself. That takes something. He paused. And I spent Wednesday running through your building getting shot at, and you kept your head the entire time, and you didn't ask me to be something I wasn't. He looked at her. I've worked for people who would have spent that time telling me what to do. You didn't. I noticed that. She absorbed that. There was something in her face that was working through something, not performing working through something, actually doing it, which was different and more visible. I want to offer you a position, she said. He nodded slowly. I figured. Head of Global Security for Orion Nexus. You'd have full authority over physical security infrastructure, personnel, protocols, threat assessment, salary. She named a number that was a significant multiple of what he made now. Plus equity, which at current valuation is Isabella. She stopped. I can't do that job, he said. You did it on Wednesday under impossible conditions with a toolbox. On Wednesday, I had nothing else to do, and I happened to be in the building. He folded his hands on the table. A head of global security for a company at your level is a full commitment. Travel, hours, the kind of availability that means you're never actually unavailable. I know what that looks like. He looked toward the hallway where Mia's drawings were visible on the living room wall. I left a career that I was good at and that wanted me because I understood that being a father was a different kind of job, and it needed the same thing every important job needs, which is your actual presence. Isabella followed his gaze to the drawings. She was quiet for a moment. She needs you here, she said. Not a challenge, just an acknowledgement of the actual thing. She needs me here. Okay. She drank her coffee. What if I propose something different? I'm listening. Part-time security consulting. Your hours, your terms, no travel requirement unless you choose it. I need someone who understands threat assessment at the level you operate. Not someone who's available at 3 a.m, but someone I can actually trust. She looked at him. I've had security directors before. What I've never had is someone I knew would tell me the truth when I didn't want to hear it. You tried to tell me the truth 4 times, and I didn't listen. I'd like to build a working relationship where that doesn't happen. He thought about it. Not for long. Reasonable hours, he said. And I'm available when Mia's in school. Done. And I don't wear a different uniform. I'll come in looking like whatever I look like. Something passed through her expression that was close to amusement and something else. I think we've both learned something about uniforms this week. And I'll still tell you things you don't want to hear. I'm counting on it. He nodded once. Then we can try it. She put her hands around her coffee cup again. Outside the window, the afternoon was doing what Seattle afternoons did, thinking about rain, deciding against it for now, keeping its options open. The sounds of the building drifted in, a door somewhere, a television from a neighboring apartment, the distant noise of the street. The FBI executed a search warrant on Sterling's home office Thursday morning, Isabella said. The materials you pulled from the safe gave them the exact structure of the shell company network. 4 separate accounts in 3 jurisdictions, routing payments from the Crestline Group contract back to Sterling personally over 14 months. Total amount was a little over $2 million, but that's not the charge that'll stick the hardest. It's the conspiracy to commit kidnapping and murder for hire that the DA is working up. How's he handling it? With his lawyer present and not a word otherwise. She paused. His wife left the house Thursday evening with their daughter, took 2 suitcases. Nathan said nothing. He'd thought about Sterling's daughter, whose birthday was March 14th and who was born in 2001. The things children inherited from their parents' choices. What about Orion? He asked. We announced the launch delay on Thursday. We're back on schedule for 60 days out instead of 72 hours. She looked at him. The board emergency session was yesterday. I made the case for retaining my position, made it to people who were, 3 days ago, probably expecting to pivot smoothly to Sterling's acquisition plan. It was not a comfortable meeting. Did you keep it? For now. 2 board members resigned. The others are committed to the new governance structure I proposed, which includes an independent security audit and an external review of all operational relationships from the past 4 years. She paused. I also added something to the board charter. What? A requirement that executive leadership conduct quarterly reviews of all internal report escalations, including reports filed by non-management employees, maintenance, operations, facilities, support staff. She said it without performance, just as fact. Every report gets read by someone with authority. We're building a system where what happened with your reports can't happen again. He looked at her steadily. That's a meaningful change. It's the least meaningful change I'm making. She met his gaze. I'm meeting with every department next week, all of them, including maintenance, cleaning crew, facilities. I'm going to listen. She stopped. I don't know if I'm going to be good at that. I've spent a long time not listening, but I'm going to try. He believed her, which surprised him slightly. Not because he'd expected dishonesty, but because in his experience, people at her level rarely arrived at this kind of commitment through anything other than catastrophe. And even then, the commitment often dissolved once the crisis receded and the pressure normalized. She had the look of someone who was holding something newly understood and was afraid of setting it down, which was the right way to hold it. You'll be bad at it at first, he said. She almost laughed. That's very reassuring. I mean it as a good thing. People who are naturally good at listening usually weren't good at building things. The discomfort means you're actually doing it. She looked at him for a moment, and then she did laugh, a real one, brief and slightly unguarded, and it changed her face in a way that was genuinely unexpected, the way a room changes when the lighting shifts. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They sat with their coffee in the comfortable quiet that neither of them had entirely expected to find themselves in, on a Friday afternoon in a 2-bedroom apartment on Jackson Street, with a child's drawings on the walls and the particular piece of a situation that had been resolved at some cost but had been resolved. Outside, the city moved through its afternoon the way cities do, indifferent to the specific stories happening inside the buildings and apartments that made it up, those small private dramas of people finding each other across the distances they'd built between themselves. The cameras had moved on to other news. The tactical vehicles were gone from 5th and Pine. The Orion Nexus building stood where it had always stood, its glass face reflecting the changing light. Dwayne filed a detailed incident report and then took 2 days of personal leave, the first he'd taken in 14 months. He spent them fishing, which he'd been meaning to do all summer. Rosa, who ran the cleaning crew on the upper floors and had come in Thursday morning to find the lobby in organized chaos and her morning routine entirely disrupted, spent her coffee break reading the news coverage on her phone and telling anyone who would listen that she'd known Nathan Cole was something. She'd always known there was something about him, and she said this with the authority of someone who had shared a coffee break with him twice a week for 2 years. Mrs. Pacheco made dinner that Friday night. A full meal, more food than 3 people needed, which was her way of expressing things that didn't fit neatly into words. Nathan ate at his own kitchen table with his daughter beside him, and the drawing she'd made for him pinned to the wall with a thumbtack, and Mia told him at considerable length about Connor's increasingly documented history of being unfair, and Nathan listened to all of it with his full attention, which was the thing he was best at, and the thing that cost him nothing, and the thing she needed most. His shoulder hurt, and his knee was stiff, and there were 14 missed calls from media numbers on his phone that he would never return. It was a good evening. The weeks after the incident had a quality that Nathan struggled to name for a long time. Not quiet exactly, There was nothing quiet about the legal proceedings, the media cycle, the internal restructuring at Orion, or the sustained administrative demands of being the central witness in a federal conspiracy case. But there was a kind of internal stillness to the period, the way the air sometimes goes very still after a major storm, when everything that was going to move has moved and what's left is what actually holds. Marcus Sterling was arraigned on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the attack in a federal courthouse 12 blocks from the Orion Nexus building. The charges were substantial: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted kidnapping, corporate fraud, wire fraud, money laundering across 3 jurisdictions. His attorney entered a not guilty plea on his behalf, which was expected, and requested bail, which was denied given the severity of the charges and Sterling's demonstrated access to international financial resources. Nathan was not at the arraignment. He was at Mia's school, sitting in a small plastic chair designed for someone a third his size, watching a first-grade performance of a play about different community helpers, firefighters, teachers, postal workers, doctors, in which Mia played a librarian and delivered her one line with the grave seriousness of someone who understood that this moment was important. He clapped when she was done. She found his face in the audience immediately, the way children always find their person, and the smile she gave him was the specific smile she reserved for him, wide and unguarded, and entirely without calculation. He had told no one at the school what had happened the previous month, and the teachers who knew him only as Mia's dad, who was always on time for pickup, didn't connect the quiet man in the second row with the name that had been in the news. That was fine with him. Better than fine. He was healing. The shoulder was stiff in the mornings and ached when the weather changed, which in Seattle meant it ached with some regularity, but the tissue was knitting back correctly, and the physical therapist, a brusque woman named Dr. Reyes, who had no patience for patients who didn't do their exercises, had told him at his 3-week appointment that his recovery was ahead of schedule, which she attributed to his physical condition, and he attributed to having no choice. He'd started the consulting work with Orion 2 weeks out from the hospital. 2 days a week initially, then 3 when the internal security audit began and Isabella wanted him present for the interviews with the outside firm she'd hired. He came in looking like himself: jeans, work boots, a decent jacket he'd owned for 4 years. Nobody said anything about what he wore. He noticed that, and he noticed noticing it, and decided that it was information about the building's changing culture rather than information worth dwelling on. The internal security audit took 6 weeks and produced a report that was, in Isabella's words during the all-hands meeting where she presented it, not flattering. The building's physical security infrastructure had significant gaps that the attack had exploited, gaps that Nathan had identified in his reports, and that had not been acted on, a failure the report documented explicitly and attributed to a culture of hierarchical filtering in which frontline observations required executive validation to move forward. The report's language was careful and professional. What it said, in the plainest possible terms, was that the system had been designed to protect the people at the top from uncomfortable information rather than to actually process it, and that this design had nearly gotten the person at the very top killed. Isabella read that section aloud at the all-hands. She didn't skip it or soften it. She read it in the same voice she used to deliver financial results, clear, direct, without editorializing. And the room of 230 employees was very quiet. "I want everyone in this building to understand something," she said when she'd finished reading. "The failure described in this report is mine. Not the security directors, not operations, not the team that processed the initial reports. Mine. I set the culture that produced the outcome. I'm responsible for changing it." She paused. Nathan Cole filed 4 reports in 4 days. Each one was routed through a system that filtered it before it reached anyone with authority to act on it. The last one was actively suppressed by the person who was simultaneously arranging the attack those reports were describing. She looked at the room. He was right. He was right every time. And the reason his information didn't get through was not because the system failed. It's because the system worked exactly as it was designed to work. It was designed to keep certain voices out of certain rooms. She put the report down. "We're redesigning it." The new reporting structure went into effect the following month. Any employee, regardless of title, could file a direct security or operational concern to a rotating review committee that included both executive representatives and frontline staff. Every filed report got a read receipt and a response within 48 hours. The committee met weekly. Nathan served as its security advisor, which meant he sat in a conference room every Wednesday afternoon with a facilities manager, 2 engineers, a member of the cleaning crew, and a rotating executive, and they read reports together. The first time Rosa from the cleaning crew sat across a conference table from Orion's CFO and told him that the ventilation covers on the 14th floor were a dust contamination risk and had been for 2 years, and the CFO wrote it down and said he'd have it addressed by the end of the month. Nathan watched it happen from his seat at the table with a feeling that he recognized, belatedly, as something close to satisfaction. Rosa caught his eye afterward in the hallway. "I've been trying to say that for 2 years," she said. "I know," he said. "It's in the maintenance log. Nobody looked at the log." "Now they look at the log?" "Now they look at the log." She considered this. "That's a small thing." "Most important things are small," Nathan said. "The big things are usually just a lot of small things that got ignored." She thought about that and nodded with the air of someone adding it to a file they'd been building for a long time. The Nexus platform launched 63 days after the attack, which was 3 days later than the revised timeline, and Isabella presented that fact at the launch event without apology, simply as information. The launch was covered by every major financial and technology outlet. The analysts who had seen the demo were right. It was a category maker, and the market responded accordingly, and Orion's valuation moved in a direction that rewrote the company's immediate future in significant ways. Nathan watched the launch event live stream from his apartment at 9 in the evening, after Mia was asleep, eating cereal at the kitchen table, because he hadn't gotten around to making dinner, and cereal was available and sufficient. On the stream, Isabella was at a podium in a venue that was the opposite of a 44-story building under siege. All polished surfaces and arranged lighting, and the kind of professional production that made everything look inevitable. She looked composed and certain and entirely in control. He thought about her in the basement, pressing her folded blazer against his shoulder in a dark mechanical room. Both were real. That was the thing about people, that they were all of it at once, the composed version and the scared version, and the version that made terrible assumptions about strangers, and the version that stayed in a crisis without falling apart. The version that handed a man $20 in public like a rebuke, and the version that said, "I'm sorry," without qualifying it. Isabella Vaughn was all of those things simultaneously, and so was he, and so was everyone. That was the thing he'd been working out since the night in the stairwell, when he'd sat against the wall with a bullet wound and a stolen laptop, and his daughter's granola bar wrapper in his jacket pocket. He'd been working out what it meant that the worst day in Orion's history had happened because of a specific failure to see. Sterling's failure to see that his plan had a flaw. Isabella's failure to see what was in front of her. The building's systemic failure to see the people it depended on. And what it meant that the way through had been a maintenance worker who had spent 2 years making himself invisible, who had never once asked to be seen, and who had ended up being the only person in the building who saw clearly when it mattered. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He'd never had patience for that framing, which flattened something complicated into something simple and then used the simple version to avoid sitting with the complicated one. He'd done what he'd done because the situation required it, and he was capable of it, and there was no one else. That was the whole story. The part that mattered wasn't the tactics or the training or the specifics of what he'd done in the building. The part that mattered was the 4 reports he'd filed before any of it, the 4 times he'd tried to route his observations through the proper channels, the 4 times the system had absorbed his concern and returned nothing. He'd kept filing anyway. Not out of stubbornness exactly, but because walking away from a real threat because the system was inconvenient wasn't something he was built to do. And there was something in that, in the persistence of doing the right thing in the right way even when nobody is listening, that he thought was worth sitting with, because it was the piece of the story that got the least amount of attention. Nobody made a movie about the 4 memos. Nobody cut a news segment about a man who tried to tell the truth 4 times through proper channels. The story everyone told was about the dramatic part, the shootout and the escape and the guy who rappelled down the outside of a 41-story building. That was the story that traveled. But the real story started with the first report. He closed his laptop and rinsed his cereal bowl and went down the hall to check on Mia, the way he did every night before he went to sleep himself. She was on her side with her blanket half off, one arm thrown over her stuffed elephant, her face completely relaxed in the specific peace of childhood sleep. He pulled the blanket back up and stood in the doorway for a moment the way parents stand in doorways, not doing anything, just being there, just marking the fact of it. He thought about the men he'd left secured to railings and pipe brackets in that building, the man whose arm he'd broken in the atrium, the man he'd hit in the stairwell. He thought about the fact that he'd done all of it and would do it again, and that this capacity in him, the part that could function in that context without hesitating, was something he'd carried out of the Navy and would carry for the rest of his life. He'd made peace with it a long time ago. It was part of him the way the injury on his shoulder was part of him, the way the years of absence from his daughter's earliest life was part of him. You didn't get to edit your own history. You got to decide what you did with what was left after it. He went to bed and slept without difficulty, which was a thing he'd always been able to do and which he'd stopped taking for granted some years ago. In the months that followed, things changed in ways that were both more and less than anyone expected. Orion's culture shifted, not cleanly, not completely, not in the way that press releases described it when Isabella's communications team wrote about the company's renewed commitment to inclusive operations. It shifted the way real things shift, which is imperfectly and unevenly and with frequent reversals and friction, in moments where the old patterns reasserted themselves because they were comfortable and change was not. There were executive meetings where the new reporting structure was treated as a compliance exercise rather than a genuine channel. There were middle managers who found the idea of frontline employees having direct access to review committees threatening in ways they expressed as practical concerns. There were days when Isabella's commitment to the changed culture collided with the immediate pressure of running a company that was growing fast and needed decisions made at pace. She called Nathan about one of those days, about 6 weeks after the launch, at 7:30 in the evening. He was helping Mia with her reading homework, which involved a book about a caterpillar that Mia had opinions about, and he put the call on speaker at low volume while they kept reading. "I had a board meeting today," Isabella said without preamble. "How was it?" Two of the new board members pushed back on the review committee structure. They said it's slowing operational decisions and creating ambiguity about accountability. She paused. "They're not entirely wrong. It is slower." "Yes," Nathan said. "They want to recalibrate, put a filter back in, limit direct filing to certain categories. That's the first step back to what you had before." "I know that. So why are you calling me?" A silence. Mia looked up at the phone and then back at her caterpillar book, losing interest in the adult conversation. "Because I wanted to say it to someone who would tell me that I know what to do," Isabella said, "and who wouldn't soften it." "But you know what to do," Nathan said. "Yes." "The discomfort is the point. If it was comfortable, it wouldn't be changing anything." Another silence. "That's annoyingly simple." "Most true things are." "I'm going to push back on them tomorrow." "I know you are." "You could have said that first instead of making me ask." "You didn't ask," he said. "You already knew. You just needed to hear yourself say it to someone who wasn't going to agree with the board." He heard her exhale. Not frustrated, something more like the release of a held thing. "Nathan." "Yeah." "Thank you." "Go push back on your board," he said, and ended the call. Mia looked up from her book. "Who was that?" "Someone from work." "Were you helping them?" He thought about it. "A little. Like how you helped me with the caterpillar?" "Somewhat less caterpillar-related," he said. "Where were we?" She pointed at the page. They kept reading. The friendship, because that was what it became. Slowly and without announcement, in the way real friendships form, which is through accumulated small moments rather than a single decisive turn, developed along the lines of two people who had nothing obvious in common except a shared understanding of what they'd survived together and a mutual, somewhat reluctant respect that had come out of the survival. Isabella came to the apartment twice more in those months, once for dinner with no specific agenda, and once because Mia had expressed a desire to meet the woman her father worked for, which Nathan had tried to gently redirect and failed. That second visit was a Sunday afternoon in November. Isabella arrived in the kind of casual clothes that still looked expensive because she didn't know how not to dress well, and Mia met her at the door with the directness of a 6-year-old who has decided that a situation is interesting. "My dad got shot because of you," Mia said. The look on Isabella's face was something Nathan was going to carry for a long time. "Mia," he said. "Mrs. Pacheco said it." Mrs. Pacheco said it in a more complicated way than that. She said because of his job saving you, Mia clarified, with the precision of someone who had considered this carefully. She looked at Isabella. Does your shoulder hurt too? No, Isabella said, recovering. I wasn't shot. Your dad protected me from that. Mia looked at Nathan's shoulder, the left one, which still carried a slight changed quality in how he held it, a ghost of the injury in the posture. Then back at Isabella. Okay, she said, apparently satisfied, and went back to what she'd been doing, which was arranging a collection of small plastic animals on the coffee table according to a system that made sense only to her. Isabella looked at Nathan with an expression that was undone in a good way. He made a gesture that meant, this is what it's like, and she sat on the couch and watched Mia arrange her animals and said, after a moment, What's the system? Mia looked up. Which ones are my friends, and which ones are strangers? How do you decide? I've known the friends longer, Mia said, with perfect logic. Isabella looked at the animals, at the ones designated friends. Can strangers become friends? Mia thought about this seriously. If you know them long enough, she said, and if they're nice. Isabella looked at Nathan over Mia's head. He looked back at her. There was nothing to say about that improved on what had already been said, so neither of them said anything. He made dinner, because that's what you do when people are in your home, and the three of them ate at the kitchen table, and Mia told the story of Connor at school with such narrative investment and accumulated detail that it had by this point taken on the quality of a saga rather than an incident. Connor had apparently committed several additional offenses in the months since the drawing comment, and Mia was keeping a meticulous internal account. Isabella listened to the full story with the focused attention she brought to important presentations, which Mia noticed and responded to by providing additional detail, which meant dinner took longer than expected and was better for it. Walking out afterward, Isabella paused at the door. She's remarkable, she said quietly. I know, Nathan said. No qualification. He'd learned that from Mia. You're doing something right. I'm doing the best I can, he said, which most days is enough and some days isn't. That's about all there is to say about it. She looked at him for a moment in the lit doorway of the apartment. Outside, November Seattle was doing what it did. Rain, darkness, the particular intimacy of a city in winter that pulls inward on itself. The $20, she said. He waited. I've thought about it a lot, not because of what came after, because of what it was. She held his gaze. I handed it to you like you were a problem I was solving, not a person I'd inconvenienced. She paused. I've been thinking about how many times I've done that and didn't have the rest of the story to correct me. A lot of times, he said, not cruelly, just accurately. Probably, she said. Yes. Most of the time, the person on the other end of that just goes home and eats dinner and their life keeps going. You don't get to know that you were wrong. That doesn't make it less wrong. No, he said. It doesn't. I don't want to be that person anymore. She said it plainly, without the performance of revelation. I'm not sure I know how to fully stop being her. It's built into how I think, but I'm working on it. He thought about what to say to that and landed on the truth, which was, that's more than most people get to, knowing the thing you're working against. She nodded, looked at the rain. Good night, Nathan. Good night. He closed the door and went back to the kitchen to do the dishes, and from the living room he could hear Mia narrating something to her plastic animals, continuing the saga, assigning them roles, running her small private world with the authority of a person who was entirely comfortable with responsibility. He washed the dishes and listened to her and thought about the distance between who he'd been on Tuesday morning in September, the man in worn work boots carrying an old toolbox, eating a bad cup of coffee alone in the maintenance station, invisible in a building full of people who had never considered his existence beyond its utility, and who he was now. And the honest answer was that the distance was smaller than the story made it seem. He had not become something different. He had become more visible, and visibility had turned out to be a different thing than he'd expected. Not better or worse, just different. More complicated, more demanding, more exposed. He didn't regret the years of invisibility. He'd used them. He'd been present for his daughter in a way that the previous version of his life had not allowed, and that was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the main thing. The rest was context, But he understood now that invisibility had its own cost, not to himself, but to the systems he moved through. Because when people who see clearly stay invisible, the systems that need clear sight to function correctly go on functioning incorrectly, and the cost of that is distributed outward to everyone who depends on them. His 4 reports hadn't been an act of importance, they'd been an act of responsibility. He'd seen something and he'd said it, and the system had failed to hear it, and then the system had paid for that failure in the most direct way available. There was a lesson in there that he didn't feel the need to package neatly, because life's lessons rarely arrived neat. What he knew was this: the people who keep the lights on and the elevators running and the pipes from bursting are not background. They are the condition of everything else. Without them, the 44-floor tower is an expensive concrete problem. The CEO with the brilliant platform launch has nowhere to launch it from. The story everyone tells about innovation and disruption and vision is being told inside a building that someone woke up early to maintain. That wasn't bitterness. He didn't carry it as bitterness. It was just the actual shape of the world, and he thought it was worth seeing clearly. He dried the last dish and put it away and turned off the kitchen light and went to check on Mia, who had arranged her animals in what appeared to be a definitive final configuration on the coffee table and had fallen asleep on the couch in the process, the stuffed elephant tucked under her arm having migrated from her bedroom at some point during the evening. He stood and looked at her for a moment. 6 years old, opinionated about caterpillars and catastrophically unfair about Connor, and entirely certain about which of her animals were friends. She would grow up, and the world would show her things he couldn't protect her from. And she would make mistakes and have her heart broken and be wrong about things she was certain about. And she would also, if he did his part well enough, have a foundation underneath her that she could come back to when the things went wrong. That was the job. Not the other job, the one in the building. This one. The one he'd been doing every single day for 4 years without recognition or ceremony or anyone filing a report about it. He picked her up carefully, his healed shoulder holding without complaint, and carried her to her room and put her in her bed and pulled the blanket up, and she stirred once and settled. On her wall, the drawing she'd made of the 2 of them at the park, the one with the enormous heads and the stick bodies and the 3 blue lines for sky, was still pinned with a thumbtack in the same spot he'd put it. The tall figure and the small one, holding hands by the tree, both of them smiling. That was the picture of his life. Not the news footage, not the official statements, not the case files or the security review reports, or the consulting contract with its reasonable hours and its honest terms. That drawing, on that wall, made by someone who loved him without condition and with enormous artistic confidence, was the most accurate document that existed of who he was and what he was doing here. He turned off the light and went down the hall to his own room, and the Seattle rain found the windows and ran down them in familiar patterns, and the building around him made its ordinary sounds. The pipes, the heat, the distant noise of the city doing what cities do at night, which is keep going. And Nathan Cole lay down in the dark and thought about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of everything, and fell asleep. 3 years later, when a journalist writing a long-form piece on corporate security culture asked him to characterize what he'd learned from the events at Orion Nexus, he thought for a while before answering. "I learned that the people nobody looks at are usually the people who see the most," he said finally, "and that the gap between those 2 things, between being invisible and seeing clearly, is where most of the important failures live." The journalist wrote it down. And on a personal level? Nathan thought about Mia at her first-grade performance, grave and serious in her librarian role. About Isabella at the kitchen table asking a 6-year-old about the system for distinguishing friends from strangers. About Dwayne handing him a bad cup of coffee every morning with no particular reason except that it had become their routine. About Rosa saying that's a small thing, and the answer that had come out of him before he'd thought it through. Most important things are small. "I already knew what I was going back to every night," he said. "That made everything else easier." The journalist waited for more. Nathan looked at him pleasantly and didn't provide any. Some things didn't need to be expanded on to be true. Some things were the whole answer, stated completely in one sentence, and the absence of elaboration was part of what made them worth hearing. He went home. He made dinner. He helped with homework. The building on 5th and Pine kept standing, which was what buildings did, And inside it, the lights worked and the elevators ran and the pipes held their pressure because someone was paying attention. That was enough. That had always been enough. The world just took a while sometimes to understand what it was looking at